Okay, this is a bit of a trial run for me. I've not used this particular technology before, so bear with me. Hopefully it will work okay. So, lecture number 7. This week we're going to be looking at issues of marketability. So in terms of the ideas we're going to touch on, chiefly we're looking at Michael Sandel, who's an American philosopher, and his notions and theories. He was the one who sort of promoted this idea of marketability as a philosophical, ethical concept, rather than simply as a business concept. We'll look at his ideas and people who agree with him, people who disagree with him, around the limitations on markets, and we'll touch a little bit on neoliberalism, which we've mentioned in previous lectures. But just to recap, particularly for anyone who wasn't present during the lecture when we were talking about neoliberalism, this is the modern economic model that we're living with today in the 21st century, which comes into fruition, if you like, in the late 20th century, things around the 1980s, a little bit before, heavily influenced by the writings and ideas of Ayn Rand, the Russian-American philosopher who we have mentioned quite a few times already. She was hugely popular with a lot of politicians and bankers and economists and what have you in America and in Britain and in various other parts of the world. Had a huge influence on Ronald Reagan and his administration, and a huge influence on Margaret Thatcher and her administration, and many other people, politicians, leaders in other parts of the world. Picked up and developed, as we've already said in previous lectures talking about Ayn Rand, on ideas that she inherited from Adam Smith and a few other people. So in terms of what it emphasises, the things you've got on your screen here: laissez-faire government, so minimum involvement of government in business and indeed in most areas of life. So if you can possibly run something without the government getting involved, then the idea of neoliberalism is that's preferable. Partly it is underpinned by the idea that politicians have a habit of messing things up and not doing them as efficiently as business will do them. Sorry, I don't know why this bloody thing keeps coming up. Privatisation is the move to privatise, to take things out of state ownership and put them into private ownership of individual millionaires, billionaires, what have you, who can run those services. So, for example, rather than a school being run by the state, a school could be owned by an academy and run as a private business for profit. A hospital could be run by the state, or it could be owned by a private company and run for profit. So the notion of neoliberalism is that almost everything should be privatised, if it's possible. They do draw the limits at some things, like privatised armies, which are rarely a good idea because they have a tendency to overthrow the governments employing them sometimes. So there are some things that which even the most ardent neoliberal would say probably not a good idea to take that out of state ownership. But by and large, most things tend to remain there. The drive towards austerity is nothing to do with economic necessity, i.e. it's not because there is a bad economy necessarily. It's an ideological austerity which stems from Rand's ideas that people should, wherever possible, should keep keep themselves independently, look after themselves, pay for themselves, buy their own health insurance, get themselves a job, not depend on the state, not require benefits and handouts and things of that sort. So the notion is that people should be as independent as possible, take care of themselves, take care of their families, and not expect the state, which in other words means taxpayers, to support them unless absolutely necessary. So the austerity drive is, even if the country's very rich, you'd still have an austerity drive to cut back on the state and the taxpayer providing financial support and aid and various other benefits to people, if they could be encouraged, pushed, pressured, assisted to provide those things for themselves. Deregulation and free trade go together, in the sense of encouraging more and more things to be on the free market for sale, which would include things that would be perhaps somewhat controversial in Britain at the moment, like healthcare, and deregulation, that the government should take a hands-off approach and leave businesses, where possible, it's not always possible, but where possible, to sort themselves out and succeed or fail on their own merits, with a minimum amount of interference from government. So the things you've got listed there about which of these would be better in private hands: trains, schools, hospitals, police forces, prisons. If we were in class, we could have a group discussion on that, but you might want to pause this recording for a few minutes, sit, have a think, which of those do you think would be better in private hands? And if you're chatting to other members of the class via social media, then you could bounce around ideas with them on that one. So pause if you want to, after you've had a thought about it. Move on. American economist Milton Friedman, very, very big name in American economics, he advances the idea that competitive capitalism doesn't need lots and lots of government rules and regulations about discrimination towards customers from various minority groups. So they should be allowed to sell what they want to who they want. His argument being that any sensible, level-headed businessman or businesswoman would want to sell to just about anyone who is capable of buying their product. So if you got, let's say, some owner of a business who's very, very racist, they're a member, well, he's an American, so we'll go with an American example, they're a member of the Ku Klux Klan, and they really, really don't want to sell to black people for their own ideological reasons. Freeman's argument is that they should be allowed not to sell to black people if they don't want to, because in the long run they will probably go bankrupt, simply because they're competing businesses elsewhere who do sell to black people and white people and Hispanic people and everyone else going. They will make more money because they are willing to sell to everyone, whereas the ideological crank who doesn't want to sell to certain groups will make less money. So they will pay the cost, if you like, for their own prejudice. So Friedman's argument is the government doesn't need to force people not to be prejudiced, because economic forces will drive the prejudiced out of business anyway in the long term. So just let them make their own decisions, and also let them live with the consequences of those decisions. So if somebody says, we'll touch on this example momentarily, I don't want to sell a product to gay people and therefore they lose a load of customers, well, Friedman's argument is tough luck on them. They'll lose customers, that's their problem, they'll have to live with the lack of income, and for every customer they lose, some other business who is quite happy to sell to gay people will gain money, will gain the custom as that gay customer goes somewhere else, or that black customer, or that disabled customer, or whatever particular group of people we're talking about takes their business to somebody else. Now it does assume, which is an issue to bear in mind, that there is always somewhere else to go to. You could imagine a situation where someone is in a very small community and maybe there is a limited array of choices, and either all of the people providing those choices of whatever good it is that the individual wants to buy, whatever product they want to buy, all the shops selling that product are run by people who have the same prejudices, so that customer has nowhere else to go. Or maybe there is only one shop anyway, if it's a very small community, and so that person is put in a very awkward position. Alternatively, but building on this argument, it's one thing if we're saying chocolate bars or cars or shoes or whatever, something that you could shop elsewhere for, or maybe just go without for a period. Maybe not the shoes. But what if we're talking healthcare? So let's say there's a doctor who really, really, really doesn't like women. They're very, very misogynistic, and a woman needs medical help, and the only doctor in town refuses to help her. If there is nowhere else for her to go, she could clearly get very ill, depending on the medical condition. She might even die. So are there situations in which we could say, following Friedman's argument, if it's the sale of some minor product, like a bag of sweets, well, the shopkeeper can pick and choose who they do or don't sell their bags of sweets to. Whereas if it's something vital, like healthcare, where someone could be seriously ill or die without the product, then is that a case for government to step in? So laissez-faire on some issues, definitely not laissez-faire on other issues. Or should everything be laissez-faire, or everything be regulated? Something to reflect on and think about. it's think about it in the abstract is all well and good, but if you imagine yourself, let's say you go into town, you go to a shop, you want to buy something, and the person on the counter goes, "Ugh, I'm not selling to you. I don't like people like you. Get out of my shop." How would you feel? Would you feel, fair enough, that shopkeeper can say what they like, screw them, I'll go to a different shop? Or would you get irate? Would you get angry? Would you want that shopkeeper to suffer some sort of legal consequence? Or do you think they should have the free will to sell to whoever they want and refuse to sell to whoever they want? Whether that's just because that particular customer is someone they individually don't like because, I don't know, that customer slept with their wife or their husband once, something like that, something very personal, or they don't like that customer because of their skin colour, their gender, their sexuality, their weight, or some other factor like that. How much freedom should a shopkeeper or other service provider have to exclude customers they don't want to sell to? Something to think about. And obviously, if we're in class, we could have a discussion about this. But again, if you want to discuss with other students via social media, or just have a chat with whoever's at home with you, or up to you how you want to bounce that idea around, what you think ought to be done in Britain. Clearly we have laws already in place, but do you think those laws ought to be changed, amended, or are you really happy with the law the way it is when it comes to issues like discrimination in the provision of services to customers? As an example of the practical example, there is the Tommy Hilfiger mini scandal, back in the mid-90s. A rumour went round on social media, and this is a warning against the dangers of social media if ever there were one, that Tommy Hilfiger had an interview with Oprah Winfrey. This was, I say, back in the 90s when she was still a big media figure. She's pretty much retired now. And is meant to have said the quote that you've got on the screen there: "If I had known that African Americans, Hispanics and Asians would buy my clothes, I would not have made them so nice. I wish those people would not buy my clothes, they were made for upper class whites." That did the rounds on social media. You know what Facebook and Twitter are like. It gets said once and then it gets said 50,000 times within the next 5 minutes. People were repeating this and saying how dreadful, how awful, how wicked Tommy Hilfiger is. At least some people are saying that. Turns out he had not actually been on the Oprah Winfrey show, therefore he had not said those things. So somebody somewhere, and I don't think they've ever worked out who it was, somebody had just made this up and accused him of saying this stuff. So a bit of libel going on there to besmirch his reputation. Perhaps it was some business rival or somebody who'd bought something from his shop and not liked it, or I don't know, but somebody had said this anyway, made it up. Eventually, kind of counter social media rumours, disclaimers went around saying, "No, Tommy Hilfiger never said this, don't believe a word of it, blah blah." Interestingly, let's look at what happened to Tommy Hilfiger during this period when he was being accused of being extremely racist. Did it damage his business? Did it dent it? Were people boycotting his store and refusing to buy his clothes? Apparently not. In fact, his market value went up, doubled, went up to £2 billion. So far from people refusing to go to that shop because they'd heard these racial rumours, it seems a ton of people were probably buying more there. Maybe people who had never gone to his shop before were now starting to go to his shops and buying his goods. Does this mean all these extra customers were people who agreed with these views on black people and Hispanics and Asians and whatnot? Or were they completely oblivious of it? Not everyone's on social media, not everyone reads memes. Maybe they had no idea what the rumours were, what was going on. It certainly doesn't seem to have had a bad impact. So going back to Milton Friedman, his argument that if you have a genuinely racist shopkeeper or shop owner, in the case of Hilfiger, Hilfiger wasn't racist, but let's say you've got Joe Bloggs, some imaginary shopkeeper who really is racist and really doesn't want to sell their clothing to black people or Chinese people or what have you. Would that actually dent their business? Because Friedman is implying, in effect, it will. They'll lose out on a lot of customers. all of those black people and Chinese people and whatnot will go somewhere else and spend their money somewhere else, and therefore some competitor will make more money and the racist shop owner will make less money. Except in this case, it doesn't seem to work. And there may be cases where it has worked, and that might be worth looking around to see if you can find any cases that would be worth mentioning in essays and things like this, if you're addressing this kind of an issue in essays. But clearly it doesn't always work, and that begs an interesting question as to why it doesn't always work. Is it because maybe there are a lot of people who share some of these views and they would think, I will definitely go and buy more stuff from that person who is also racist, or also sexist, or also homophobic, or also whatever other word you want to use, because I approve, and maybe for every one customer a person loses, they gain 2 others, perhaps. Who can say? But it's worth thinking about anyway. Another example, one you've probably, you might not have heard of this particular one, but there's been several cases like this, including one in Ireland that went on and on and on. But back in 2012, in the summer of 2012, 2 guys, Charlie Craig and Dave Mullins, were going to get married to each other, same-sex wedding, and they went out to a bakery in Colorado where they lived, went along to the shop, which was owned by a man called Jack Phillips, and they said, we want you to bake a wedding cake for us, we want it to look like this and this and this, and we want you to put the 2 little plastic figures on the top of it, 2 men. And the Jack Phillips, the owner of this bakery shop, said, I'm a devout Christian, I don't believe in same-sex marriage, it's against my religion, therefore I'm not comfortable baking you a wedding cake. Apparently there'd been customers there before, so they'd gone in to buy bread and buns and whatever else they'd bought. They were ready to been happy to sell them all of those things, but he said the wedding cake is one step too far, because if I bake this wedding cake, I feel that I am de facto approving of your marriage, when in fact I don't approve of your marriage because it's against my religious beliefs. So the couple, Craig and Mullins, they went to the Civil Rights Commission in Colorado, and they said, well, we feel discriminated against and prejudiced against, and it became a court case, and it dragged on and on and on, and it went through social media again and again and again, and there were newspaper articles about it, and various people on chat shows talking about it, some very against it, some very for it. Dragged on and on and on, much like the same situation which happened with a bakery in Ireland. That wasn't a wedding cake, that was a cake for a gay pride event, which had a slogan, not painted, what's the word, iced onto the cake. Which again, a similar kind of idea, that the owner of that shop said, you can buy a cinnamon bun and you can buy a loaf of bread, but I don't want to make a cake with this particular slogan on it. And I believe in the Irish case, the owner said, I'll bake you the cake, you can have it as a plain cake, and then you can buy a bag of icing from Tesco's and put whatever thing you want on it. But the people who were buying the cake said, no, we want a sort of professionally done logo, we don't just want me with an icing bag making a botch job of it. That dragged on for quite a period of time. So again, if we were in class and discussing this as a group, this is the point where I'd be asking you to chuck ideas around between you as students and think, would you be on the side of the couple, Craig and Mullins, or would you be on the side of the owner of the cake shop, Phillips, in that if you are asked to produce a cake with some design or a logo or a theme to it that goes against something that you personally believe, would you just make it, take the money and say, go away? Or would you feel that you are being required to approve of something you don't approve of? Again, if you want to pause the video, have a think, have a chat with your other half or whoever's in the house, bounce ideas around on social media, see how you think. And then, once you've had a think, here's some other examples. Now, on the picture on the bottom, well, it's not the cake involved in the case of Craig and Mullins, it's just a cake with 2 little plastic men on top for a same-sex wedding. A lot of people on social media and in the public in general have been quite sympathetic to the gay couple in Colorado, and likewise to the people who wanted to buy the cake in Ireland. But there are other types of cake where perhaps those same people would be a lot less sympathetic. But does the same argument apply? Because the argument of people saying no, a baker should bake any cake they're commissioned to, and it's not about you approving. So just because, let's say I were baking a cake for a straight couple who wanted to get married, a wedding cake, and I didn't like them, I just thought they were horrible people, or I thought they were really badly matched, and this is the kind of marriage that's going to end in divorce in 3 months' time. Should I just bake the cake, take the money, say, well, you get on with it, I don't care, I'm not going to the wedding, it's not I'm going to be there, I'm just giving you a cake? Would I be seen to approve of a relationship that I think is doomed to fail just because I've provided a cake for sale? I'm not a wedding guest or anything like that. And so a lot of people say, well, bakers aren't guests at the wedding, they're just providing an object. They're not providing approval. But what about these other ones you've got here? So the one in the top left-hand corner, which is a nice looking cake, except when you read the slogan, obviously it says, "Nobody loves you." I don't know what that was baked for. Would you bake a cake and somebody says, I want to give this cake to so-and-so down the road from me who I don't like, and I want them to open the box and see this cake and burst into tears? Would you say, fair enough, that'll be 50 quid, thank you very much, here's your cake? Or would you say, I am not, this is psychologically harmful to some poor person this cake is being given to. I don't want to bake such a mean cake. Or would you go for the option suggested by some bakers that you can have the cake and a bag of icing, and you can write whatever slogan you want to write on it when you get home? Now, the cake in the bottom right-hand corner with the "God hates fags" slogan on it, to me that looks as if it's been baked at home rather than by a professional baker in a shop. The icing is quite sloppy. Obviously, a non-professional isn't going to produce the same quality of writing and design and what have you that you have on the top left-hand corner picture. Imagine you've got a gay baker, so a gay person who owns a bakery, and somebody comes in and says, I really hate gay people, I want you to bake a cake that says "God hate fags" on it. I suspect that a lot of people who were sympathetic to the customers who wanted to buy the same-sex wedding cake would be very unsympathetic to the customer who wants to have a "God hates fags" message written on it. And they might say, well, that's hate speech, or hate icing, as it were, writing, I don't know how you want to describe that. And therefore, the baker would be in their rights to refuse. And could you even argue under the laws of some countries that simply by writing that in icing, is the baker breaking some law there? Are they engaging in a hate crime? Or is it the customer who wants that message? Are they the one who is engaging in the hate crime? Or maybe both of them, customer and baker alike, could be engaging in something potentially illegal, as well as maybe morally offensive. The cake in the middle, the Hitler-shaped cake, that looks to me professionally done. For a birthday cake for some rather peculiar person. Is it a hate message, a cake in the shape of Hitler? If it was a cake in the shape of Robert Mugabe, would that be a hate message? I don't know. I'm not sure what the legal position on that cake would be. It's clearly tacky, to put it mildly, to have a cake in the shape of Hitler. But supposing let's suppose it's a Jewish neighbourhood and a Jewish baker, and the person going into the shop says, right, I want a Hitler cake and I want you to bake it. Should that Jewish baker, or doesn't even have to be a Jewish baker, it could be any kind of baker, but obviously would be an even more sensitive issue if it was a Jewish baker, should they have the right to say, I am not baking this cake for you, this is just an immoral thing that you've asked? Again, if this is I'm not going to give you the answer to these questions because I'm not even sure there is a clear-cut answer to these questions. It's a matter of interpretation of ethics and how you apply ideas and understandings. If we're going down a deontological route, there'd be one law that would apply to all bakers, no matter what they're asked to do. If we're going down a more relativist route, what is offensive to one baker would not be offensive to another baker, necessarily, so it would become a matter of individual choice as to whether that baker wants to provide a cake for a customer. Something to consider and explore. And obviously it doesn't just apply to cakes, it could be almost any product where the person creating the product, or at least selling the product, has concerns about the nature of what they're being asked to do, because they have concerns about the customer in some capacity and maybe feel what they're being asked to do is inappropriate. How much freedom should the service provider have to refuse to provide service to a given customer or a given or let's say they might say have the blank cake, put your own icing message on it. That kind of midway argument. You couldn't really do that with a Hitler cake, could you? Say here's a blank face, put your own silly moustache on it. I don't think that would work. Coming on to Michael Sandel, American philosopher, one of them, very few people we've looked at who's actually still alive and philosophizing and writing and teaching. Back in 2012, he wrote a book called Moral Limits of Markets, which summarized ideas he'd been discussing at lectures for quite a few years prior to that. He's very, very popular in America. He gives sell-out lectures that get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people turning up to them. You can imagine something like that happening in this country, if only. He's got ideas on a whole raft of issues. He talks a lot about justice, for example, but we'll focus on his ideas around markets for the sake of this lecture. His notion is that there are goods which you can sell, and by goods I also mean services like chiropody or massage or fixing someone's car or doing their hair or whatever, as well, alongside actual shops selling products. So whether we're talking product or service, he says there are some things perfectly okay to sell. If you want to sell chocolate bars, if you want to sell boxes of breakfast cereal, if you want to sell shirts and jumpers and coats, perfectly fine with all of that. There are other things which he says you could do for free, but which would become unethical, immoral, if you demanded money for them. And therefore his argument is that markets should not be a free-for-all, sell anything you want to anyone you want. They should have rules and regulations from government, so it's not a laissez-faire argument, it's one for government involvement, to restrict what can and cannot be sold, and to whom certain things can or cannot be sold. For example, age restrictions on the sale of alcohol, as an example. And he goes into quite a lot of detail. I'm going to get a sort of a surface version for the sake of this lecture, because I'm hoping you'll go away and read up on his ideas, listen to his own podcasts, his own lectures, and get a much deeper idea directly from the man himself, and then think about these notions and concepts. So in effect, what he is arguing is that money can become a corrupting force under certain circumstances, and that there are other values in the world aside from the almighty dollar, or in our case, the almighty pound. And those other values are sometimes worth more than money. And if you bring money into the equation, the other qualities, the other values are lost. We'll look at some practical examples as we go along. So what are some of these other values? Well, to give you two quite simple examples, there are acts of love. In other words, something you might do for another person because you love them, not because they're paying you to do that thing. And if they tried to pay you to do that thing, you would be offended or feel that somehow it's cheapening the experience. Likewise, you might do stuff to improve yourself, to make yourself a better person. Should you be paid to make yourself a better person? One of the ideas we touched on in class, I can't remember if it was last week, maybe the week before, there was an example from this country, from up north, where a local council had run a scheme to discourage pregnant women from smoking, and if the women had gone a certain period of time without smoking and they had tests to prove that they had not smoked, then they would be rewarded with shopping vouchers. We discussed that in class, and some people, well, in fact most people actually in class, thought it was a bad idea. In other words, the opinion voiced by a lot of you was that a pregnant woman should stop smoking because when she's given the medical information, she would know it's bad for her child, for her unborn child, and therefore she shouldn't do it for the sake of the child, not for the sake of shopping vouchers. So in other words, if she's only quitting smoking for shopping vouchers, does that mean she doesn't really care about her child? So again, an example of something you might say is done for the good of the person, to improve their own health, and for an element of love of the unborn child, to improve the unborn child? Would money or vouchers or whatever other kind of incentives spoil that? Should they be doing it for the sake of doing it, not for getting something out of it? He talks about various other kinds of restrictions that we already have. Just about every country on earth has these, but I can't think of a country offhand that does not have these. So some countries will restrict sales of goods because the item being sold is seen as far too dangerous. So over here, clearly you can't walk into a corner shop and buy an Uzi 9mm and pretend you're Arnold Schwarzenegger, because we regard that as far too dangerous to sell that kind of military hardware to random shoppers. Some countries, with the right licensing and whatnot, you could go and buy that. So kind of a debate going on there. Likewise, there are objects, services, whatnot, that are limited by government because the perception is that either the person's going to hurt themselves or they'll hurt others. So in the case of buying an Uzi 9mm, the implication is you'll go and hurt somebody else. But likewise, we restrict the sale of crack cocaine. You can't buy, well, not legally, you can't buy crack cocaine, because even though you might not hurt anybody else with the crack cocaine, once you've consumed it, it will screw up your health. So in one case, you can't buy it because you might hurt somebody else, and in the other case, you can't buy it because you might hurt yourself. But equally, you can go and buy 15 bottles of scotch. If in this point in history you can find a shop with 15 bottles of scotch left on the shelves, and you could go home and drink yourself into unconsciousness, or into alcohol poisoning, or into liver cirrhosis, depending on how rapidly you drink it, and the government will not stop you from doing so. Is that a double standard? Clearly yes. But how we interpret that double standard and what we feel government should do about the double standard, there's a lot of room for debate in and of itself. The third option you've got listed there is that some objects, simply by the way they are created, cause harm. So it's not the person purchasing them at the other end that's going to suffer or cause harm. It's the way the object is made in and of itself is harmful. So you could not have an article of clothing made from the skin of an endangered species that's on a protection list. That would be illegal because they'd have to go and kill more members of that endangered species to get the skins and furs and what have you to make that coat or whatever the item may be out of it. Clearly, the sale of fur coats from non-endangered species is perfectly legal. That causes obviously a great deal of harm to the animals being killed off and skinned. Not quite the same issue, a common species versus an endangered species, but the underlying pain and suffering is still there, so there's grey areas in this, which you could think about and keep saying, discuss on social media and so forth. So another thing for you to think about, discuss, if you want to pause the video and sit and mull over. Of the items you've got listed there, crystal meth, tiger skin rugs, as in real tigers, not synthetic, pretend tiger skin rugs, but the real thing. Machine guns, police uniforms, child porn, rehypnol, which is a date rape drug if anyone is unfamiliar with it, or whiskey. Should those be sold to absolutely anyone? Should they be banned outright so that nobody can buy them at all? Or would you opt for a middle ground where they can be sold but only to certain people under certain circumstances? So for example, with whiskey, obviously already the law says you've got to be an adult to go and buy whiskey. You can't buy whiskey as a child. So it's restricted from sale to children. So which of those would you ban outright? Which of those would you have for sale to absolutely anyone who wanted them? And which of those would you restrict, so sale but only to certain people under certain conditions? Have a think about that one. Mull it over, bounce around ideas, share and discuss. So in terms of changing laws, and we'll try and stick to laws in this country, but you can apply it equally to laws in any country. People like Sandel and Deborah Zatz argue that in some countries the law needs changing and tightening because some countries the laws are too liberal about what can be bought and what can be sold, exchanged for cash and so forth. And it's on a circumstance by circumstance basis. So you could have a think, are there any laws in Britain which you think are too weak when it comes to the sale of certain goods or certain services, laws which you would like to see tightened up to address the sale of objects or services which you might think are harmful or in some other way problematic. On the flip side of that, we've got people like Jason Brennan and Peter Jaworski. They wrote a response to Sandel's Moral Limits of Markets in 2015, which you can also, I think you can get a free copy of that online, actually. Not worth looking into. Where they say his points are interesting but oversimplified. So their argument is around the money issue, in essence. That they are quite, I suppose we'd say, fairly hardline capitalists in this one. So their point is that if it's morally acceptable to do something for free, it should be morally acceptable to charge money for it as well. And conversely, if it would be wrong to do it for free, it would be wrong to do it for money. And if it's wrong to do it for money, it's wrong to do it for free. So they're wanting consistency in which the money issue is not the issue of focus. Either a thing is okay to do or it's not okay to do, regardless of whether money comes into it or not. And they go into some fairly complex arguments around individual cases and examples that Sandel gives. We'll touch a little bit on this, but again, I'm hoping you'll do the background reading and go into more of it yourself in your own time. So some of the issues that they flag up as disagreements with Sandel and Deborah Zatz and people of a similar point of view. One of them is the mere commodity objection. So Sandel says that if you buy something or sell something for cash, that something becomes a commodity and a mere commodity. And that reduces it from something that's done for free, out of love or out of kindness or charity or whatever motivation. And various examples of this are given. So, to give you one of them, that Sandel argues, let's say you've got teenagers, or, well, they could be children of any age, actually, they don't have to be teenagers, and you say to your child, I'd like you to go and visit your granny. She's quite lonely, I'd like you to go and visit your granny. And your child says to you, oh, don't want to. I'll only do it if you pay me £5. Then I'll go and visit granny. Now, clearly the child is not visiting granny out of love. If they wanted to do it out of love, they'd have been there. They're only doing it for the cash. So does the visitation to granny become a commodity, a product? I'll go and sit with granny for an hour or whatever it is and pretend to like her and pretend to enjoy her company if you pay me to do that. So it's almost like renting a grandchild. They've got to be hired, paid to go and fake affection, fake interest, because they don't have enough spontaneous affection and interest in their granny to do it for free. Does that reduce the act of visitation to a commodity? Sandel argues yes it does, and that therefore is a problem. Whereas Brennan and Jaworski would perhaps suggest that this is not always an issue to be understood in that way, because you've been paid to do something doesn't make it a commodity. So I'm being paid to teach you this lecture. I'm not doing it to you for free, I'm giving it to you for free. Does that make the lecture a commodity that you have purchased? Well, in a sense it is, yes. Does that make it less worthwhile than if I were on here doing it for nothing? I'm not going to give you an answer on that one. Have a think about it. Would you value the lecture more, if at all, if I were giving the lecture for free, than rather the fact that you've had to pay whatever it works, I don't know what it works out at per lecture, but pay a certain amount of money. The next one is the wrong signal objection, which kind of builds on this idea that are certain things disrespectful if you only do it for money. So that's, again, building on this notion like visiting granny only for money. You can hire people who will pretend to be your friend for an evening go out with you for dinner, watch a film with you, chat to you, be all social and jolly. And the notion is that they are faking it. They're almost like actors. Some of them actually are out-of-work actors who will engage in these services. In the same way that some prostitutes will provide what's usually termed a girlfriend experience or a boyfriend experience, as the case may be, in which it's not just a 5-minute in and out sex thing. They'll spend time with a person, have dinner with them, chat with them, socialise with them, and sex at the end of it, but it's meant to be more like an evening out with someone who likes you, except of course you're paying them. So do they actually like you? Now, anyone who's got customers in whatever line of work you do, you'll have some customers you can't stand and some customers you really like. And when you're friendly to the customers you really like, you're not faking it. You're being paid, but you're not faking the like. You genuinely do like them as customers. You find them funny or amusing or nice or whatever it is that you find them. And so just because you've taken a handful of money to spend that period of time selling or servicing whatever it is that you're doing with the customer in some capacity, does that make it fake? When you're with the customers you don't like, where you have to kind of put on a smile through gritted teeth and pretend to be polite to them even though you don't like them, that's fake, clearly. And you're only doing that for the money. If they weren't paying you, you wouldn't bother being nice to that person. But does it undermine the other cases? Debatable. Brennan and Jaworksi say not always. Finally, we've got the wrong currency objection. That the implication that money makes things cold and impersonal. And it's going back to Sandel's argument about there being other forms of currency in inverted commas, such as doing something out of love, or doing something for self-improvement, or doing something because you're very religious and you feel this is an act of service to God, or any one of 100 other reasons why you might do something that's not involving money, but nonetheless is for a reason that's very important to you. Is doing something for the money lesser, of less importance, less significance, less ultimate value than doing it for one of those other reasons? Sandel suggests yes, but Brennan and Jaworski say, well, not always. Just because you are, let's say you're a nurse and you're helping a patient and you're giving them a bed bath and you're talking to them and you're tending to them and doing all of that, you are being paid a wage. You're there to do all of those things for money. And perhaps if they weren't paying you, you'd have to be doing a different job because you can't afford to give your time away for free. You're not in that kind of economic position. Does that somehow mean all of the kindness, the compassion, the tenderness, the chit-chats, the conversations that's going on while you're doing the bed bathing and sorting out their medications and whatever else it is you're doing for that patient, does that make that any less valuable, less important, less significant, of less emotional impact to the patient just because you're taking a wage packet? Or that kind of intimate work only be done by people who are doing it for free? In which case, who the hell would do it? Would you find enough people to run a hospital who are able and willing and have the time and the spare resources to go and nurse for nothing? I suspect almost every hospital would close overnight. They just wouldn't be able to find enough volunteers to provide that level of service. It's provided because the nurses are paid, because the doctors are paid, because the orderlies are paid. And if they weren't being paid, they'd all be off doing other things to earn money. And those services there wouldn't be enough volunteers to go around to make that hospital viable. So is money therefore somehow a wrong currency, a bad currency, when in fact it can still enable very important things to be done, things that have a big emotional impact on the lives of the patients, and indeed where the nurse comes to really like their patient, an emotional impact on the nurse as well as the actual patient. Something to think about. Other issues he's concerned about, Sandel this is, exploitation is a key one there. The argument that a lot of people do things only for money, which they would not do under any other circumstance. When we say only for money, it's because they're so desperate for money. They've tried various other routes to make money and it's not worked. Maybe they're not very educated or very qualified or whatever, and they can't earn the money they need by doing anything else, so they engage in certain activities out of sheer desperation for cash. You've got various examples there. In this country, it's illegal to sell your organs, but in other parts of the world, either it is legal or simply the law just isn't strong enough to regulate it, and so it happens kind of on the black market, as it were. Imagine how desperate you would have to be to sell one of your eyes, or to sell a kidney, or to sell blood, as happens in America, and you get paid for selling blood. And so not everyone, there are people who are quite well off who donate blood in America, but there are also quite a lot of people who have no other income except their blood. And would they give that blood under any other circumstances? Well, debatable, but it becomes an issue. Prostitution is often suggested in this line. If you're having sex with somebody you find quite ugly and repulsive, but you're doing it because you need the money, is that exploitation? Are you being exploited by them? There are conditions where you might, some circumstances where you might argue the exploitation goes in other directions as well. If you're a prostitute and you think your customer's really good looking, I suppose that's a different circumstance. Perhaps if it's the kind of person you would happily have sex with for free. But there are going to be clearly people on the game, mainly women, but some men as well, who are selling their bodies for people they probably want to go home and shower in Dettol afterwards because they don't like the experience, but they really, really need money. Bum fight's not what you're thinking, Michael. A bum fight is an American term for some very odd people who go and pay money to the homeless, to tramps, and then say, I'll give you $50 or whatever it is if you go and fight each other. And then they'll video it. So they'll video two homeless people, alcoholics on the street, what have you, bashing hell out of each other, and pay them at the end of it. So those two people would not be hitting each other were they not being paid. I suppose you could argue that boxing matches and wrestling matches are to some extent the same kind of thing. They are getting paid after all, if it's professional sports. But desperation doesn't come into it in the same way as it does with homeless people who've been in 3 days who will thump another homeless person just for money so that they can go and eat, or possibly spend it on drink or drugs or whatever it is that they're going to go and spend it on. Definitely exploitative. How do we regulate people doing things solely out of that kind of really dubious, dodgy exploitation? It's not an easy thing to consider. Where it gets more complex is that how many people are engaged in jobs, not talking extreme weird jobs, just mainstream jobs, doing things they find really boring, disheartening, tedious, or for customers or with other people that they work with in the same building whom they can't stand and would cross the street to avoid. But they're only doing it because they really need the money. I would imagine that's a large percentage of the population find themselves doing things because they really need the money, things that they would not do under other circumstances, or at least not for those particular people under other circumstances. Not as extreme as prostitution or two homeless people bashing each other about, but how many people would want to sweep the streets if they didn't have to sweep the streets, if they could make money doing something else? But then those jobs need to be done, and this is Jaworski and Brennan's argument. A lot of jobs are not very pleasant, but someone's got to do them, and they get paid to do them. Do they feel exploited? Maybe. Would they give those jobs up if they could get a ton of money doing something else? Probably. But those jobs still need to be done, unless we move to the point where we get robots doing all those unpleasant jobs, whereupon you're going to have a lot of unemployed people who are no longer able to do those jobs because there's a robot doing it instead, and is that any better of a situation? The incentivizing issue has this question: when does an incentive become a bribe? So going back to that situation we mentioned earlier with the pregnant women who are smoking, Are they being incentivized to quit smoking, or are they being bribed to quit smoking? Sandel gives examples of children in schools being given incentives, rewards, monetary rewards and so on, if they read a certain number of books in a certain period of time. And his argument is that, perhaps coming from a fairly well-off background and always being an avid reader himself, kids should read books because they enjoy reading books, not because they've been bribed to read books. But we take the example there, and this has actually happened, I think this might have been mentioned by someone in a previous class, but this has happened where a woman went round, very well-off woman, went round ostensibly helping drug-addicted women, mainly women, I think possibly some men as well, but it was mainly women. And part of her deal for helping them was that if they got themselves sterilised, she would pay them a whack of money. Why did she start doing this? Because she had worked with and seen the condition that drug-addicted babies were born into, i.e. their mothers were drug addicts, so the baby was born with an addiction and therefore going into withdrawal symptoms, into cold turkey from the moment it came out of the womb, because their mothers were addicted to heroin and crack and various really very heavy-duty substances. And she wanted to prevent more babies being born in those circumstances, so her solution was to incentivise, bribe, call it what you will, those women, and possibly some men, to get sterilised so they wouldn't have infants born into those circumstances. Is that an ethical thing to do? Is it a form of social engineering and eugenics? You'd hope pregnant women would give up the drugs for the sake of their own health and the sake of their child, but some of them might only do it if they are paid large sums of money to do it. Do we pay very, very overweight people to lose weight? Because obviously there's a huge impact on the NHS in terms of diabetes and a whole heart problems and a whole raft of health issues that come with being exceedingly large. Should those people be told to lose weight for your own good, to your own benefit to lose weight? Or would it be economically more advantageous for society to say, well, if we paid you a small amount of money and you lost weight, in the long term we're saving a much larger amount of money because we don't have to spend all the healthcare on your diabetes or whatever other health problems you might get from being massively overweight later on in life? Perhaps. As students, there's a question for you. Should as students you get an incentive for reward? I know parents who have done this say to their kids, well, if you get a B in your exam or an A in your exam, I'll give you a new bike or a new PlayStation or whatever the thing is. To say, I'll reward you. If you get this grade, you get this incentive, and if you get a higher grade, you'll get an even better incentive. Whether we're talking children or mature students such as yourselves, should there be a kind of an incentivising process going on? So should the government say, well, if you leave university with a first, we'll cut your student loan in half, and if you leave with a 2-1, we'll knock 25% off your student loan, and if you leave with a 2-2, we'll knock 10% off. Would that work? Would it be appropriate? What do you think? Sandel picks up on this idea of sincerity. We've already mentioned the idea about paying kids to visit their grandmother. The wedding speech is something he cites, that there are websites and books and people who will write speeches for you. So you're the best man or the father of the bride or whoever you might be, and you've got to give a speech at a wedding. You could write your own. It might be really funny. It might be really crap. That's it. Should you be able to hire someone to write a really good speech for you, and then you deliver it and everyone's in tears and they're so emotional, it's all this and that and that. If they're emotional at what they think are your words, but actually they're the words written by somebody over there who you pay 50 quid to write it for you, does that make what you've done less valid, less sincere, less genuine, less from the heart? Perhaps. Again, it'd be interesting to hear your views on this one, how you interpret it. What if you get a promotion and it turns out you only got a promotion because you bunged some money to the boss? What if some student somewhere gets a first and they only got a first because their father or mother was very, very rich and they paid for a brand new wing at the university, extension of the library or something or another, so they've spent 100 grand, whatever it might be, and so someone somewhere has fudged their not very good grade to bump it up and make it look much bigger than it is, much better than it is. Is that dishonest? Well, I guess if that person is graduating to be a doctor and they don't really know half as much about medicine as their grade implies they do, that could be quite frightening for the future patients. If they're graduating with a degree in a subject where they're not likely to maim anyone, maybe it's less of an issue. But nonetheless, is it dishonest, insincere? Does the qualification lose its value because it's been purchased rather than achieved through hard work? Things to think about. What could you pay for acceptably? What becomes corrupt by the process of paying for it? If anyone's wondering, the word simony appears on the screen. That was a term used in the medieval church where somebody from a very wealthy family could become a priest, and they're usually the father or mother or uncle, some other rich relative anyway, would bung a lot of money at the church, and that priest would then be promoted up the ranks to become a bishop or a cardinal or whatever. They hadn't achieved that because of hard work or spiritual devotion or because they knew the Bible backwards, forwards and sideways. They achieved their high rank in the church because someone had given the church a ton of money for them to clamber up to a high rank. And that led to lots of accusations within the church and from outside the church, and ultimately was one of the big factors involved in the schism between the Catholics and the Protestants. These accusations of corruption, that simony was a way of corrupting the church by getting incompetent people promoted purely by giving money, not because they were any good or in any way holy or in any way decent people, to be doing a higher ranking job. There you go. Again, shame we're not in class because I'm sure we could get some discussion going on this one. Which of these would you do? Have a think about this one. Let's say McDonald's or any other big corporation says, I'll give you £1,000 or larger sums of money to get their logo tattooed on your forehead so you become a walking billboard. Not on your arm, under your sleeve, but smack on your forehead where everyone can see it. Is your answer no? Is your answer, I'll do it for £5,000, £10,000, £20,000, in which case it becomes negotiable? Would you want your body to be a billboard? Every time you walk out of a shop with a carrier bag with the logo of the shop on the carrier bag, you are a walking billboard for that shop, and you have paid to buy whatever is in the bag. They haven't paid you to carry their logo around and be a walking billboard for them. But you're being a walking billboard for them. Likewise, if you've got a designer label with logo on your clothing, every time someone sees it, you are a walking billboard, but you have paid for the privilege of being a walking billboard. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Should they pay you to advertise? Where should things be advertised? Where should they not? What about a corporation that projects a massive great logo using a light projector onto the side of a building? Is that okay? Does it matter what the building is? Does it matter what the company is? What about sports stars who are sponsored by various big corporations and have logos all over their clothing or on their cars if it's motor racing or various other places for other types of sports? Acceptable? Unacceptable? What if a very lonely person contacts you, let's say social media for argument's sake, and they say, I'm really lonely, I've not been out of the house in a month of Sundays, no one likes me. If I give you £100, will you spend a day with me and be nice to me? We can go for a sandwich, we can go for a walk in the park, we can watch a film, we can chat about the weather. Pretend that you like me. So even if you meet them, you can't stand them, you've been paid £100 to smile at them and be polite to them and friendly to them and talk to them and be jolly to them. How much money would you want to be nice to a random stranger for a day and pretend that you're their friend? Or is no amount of money going to get you to fake it Because ultimately, when the day is up and they've paid for 3 hours and you look at your watch, oh, you've had your 3 hours, I'm off, bye, you've got no intention of seeing them again. You're not really their friend. You're only there for the money. Is that actually friendship? So it's companionship in a sense. You're spending time with them. And this is, it's nothing new. If we look at the Victorian era and the Edwardian era and into the 30s, 40s, people were still doing it in the 50s, there were wealthy, mainly women, more so than men, wealthy ladies who would hire a companion. And the companion was a poorer woman who would be paid to, some of it was fetching and carrying and sort of being a servant in a small way, but mainly just to be there as someone to talk to, because those rich women were just lonely and they were bored, and if they went shopping or went to the theatre, they wanted someone to go with, and so they'd take their companion with them. But that companion was only there because they were paid. If she hadn't been paid, they probably wouldn't have seen her for dust. So nothing new. What if, come the next election, some politician comes up to you and says, here's £50, vote for me, which is illegal, by the way. Would you take it? Should it become legal? Should anyone be able to say, well, we'll give you this amount of money, or we'll donate money to your child's school if you vote for us? Which kind of is sort of what goes on in elections. You get all these promises, vote for us and we'll build a new hospital, vote for us and we'll reopen the school library, vote for us and we'll do this, we'll do that. Half the time they never do any of it. But is that a bribe? Vote for us and you'll get stuff. If they just did it up front, vote for us and I'll give you 50 quid. It's a bit more overt, a bit more in your face, but it's not that different from saying, vote for us and I'll do something lovely for you, versus vote for me and I'll give you 50 quid. Should it be allowed? Is it corrupting the system? Is it immoral? What if you get two rival politicians? Do you say, well, this one's offered me 50 quid, you give me 60 quid and I'll vote for you instead? And then you're being competed for by rival politicians. It could get quite silly in a sense, but again, rival politicians try and outdo each other with promises. This party promised this, well, we'll give you even more than that party is offering you if you vote for us. It's kind of the same thing, sort of. So, going back to Jaworski and Brennan's argument around moral consistency, money shouldn't enter it. If it's okay to do it for free, it's okay to do it for money. If it's not okay to do it one way, it's not okay to do it the other. Those things you got listed on the screen, giving a friend heroin for free, murdering someone for free, or murdering someone your friend doesn't like for free, clearly both exceedingly illegal things to do in this country, and practically every other country as well. Their point being, if you can't give someone heroin as a gift legally, you shouldn't be able to sell it to them. So the money is neither here nor there. It's a wrong thing to do, regardless of whether you're doing it for money or whether you're doing it for free. Likewise, murdering someone, assassinating someone, is wrong whether you're being paid to do the assassination or whether you're doing it because some nice person asked you and you thought, oh yeah, fair enough, I'll go and do it because I like you. It's wrong in either case. It's illegal in either case. So for Jaworski and Brennan, the money is besides the point. It's the act in and of itself. Does that point carry across to all the sorts of other things that we've been mentioning that Sandel objects to for various reasons? Is the money issue besides the point, or, as Sandel argues, is the money issue the very point, that act of paying your child to go and visit granny or whatever it may be, that in and of itself is what makes it wrong? Because clearly visiting granny for free is perfectly fine. But as Sandel suggests, does the money corrupt, or as Jaworski and Brennan say, is it the act, not the money, that's the issue? Therefore, they would say have a freer market, a bigger market, whereas Sandel is saying the market needs limiting as to what can and can't be sold. That YouTube clip, I won't play it now because you can go onto the PowerPoint, click it yourself, play it and listen to it. Loads of private prisons in America. We've got 14 in Britain at the moment. That may grow in the future. It has raised lots of concerns, lots of questions in America and other countries which also have private prisons. A company runs a prison. The government pays them per prison. So there's a flat rate. Each prisoner gets, well, the prisoner doesn't get paid, the company gets paid. So if they've got 50 prisoners, they get paid a certain amount. If they've got 100 prisoners, they get paid twice as much each week that prisoner is in the prison. From that, they have to pay for the food, they have to pay the heating bill, the lighting bill, the wage packet for all of the staff in the prison and so forth. And, here's the key point, make a profit. What's the point of having a private business if you don't make a profit? This defeats the point of having it. So they have got to have, creamed off the top, a profit. So however much money the government pays them per prisoner, some of that money will not be spent on the prisoner or their food or the guards or all of the heating in the prison or any of that. Some of that money will go as profit to the company. That's the deal. That's the arrangement. If the prison is run by the government, they're not trying to cream off a profit. They're trying to effectively just make it break even, in a sense. Spend what they need to spend and not take more than they need to spend out of tax money. Some of the concerns that come out of this, certainly from the American experience, is that there have been cases, several people have been arrested and so on, of judges who have taken bribes from companies to dish out prison sentences to prisoners for offences where they might easily have given a fine or community service or a non-custodial sentence. So in other words, the prison company, the company that owns the prison, is saying to the judge, look, send us more prisoners and we'll bung you some money. And so that judge is giving out harsher sentences than they otherwise would. It gets even dodgier because a lot of these people have been arrested for doing this, these judges. The record suggests that they're not just dishing out prison sentences to any old prisoner, that their decisions often have quite a strong racial element, i.e. they're giving more prison sentences to Hispanic or black or whatever prisoners than they are to other not prisoners, to people accused in the dock than they are to other people of other ethnicities that are accused in the dock. So there's this even murkier level. And certainly if you're thinking social class, more people from the working classes go to prison than from the middle or the upper classes. You've got that quote there from Campbell about the working classes are in the prison, the middle classes are running them, the prison doctors and the guards and so on. And the upper classes, the very wealthy, are the ones owning the prisons and creaming off a ton of profit from them. And there is a bit of kind of class corruption as well as this sort of dodgy racial politics going on. Governments will say that business will run a prison more effectively and efficiently than the government will. Therefore it's better in the long run. Now there's another issue here, not to labour the point too much. If somebody goes to prison and they're rehabilitated and the rehabilitation works, they come out, they live a law-abiding life, they will never go back to prison because they'll never commit another crime. From a profit and loss point of view, you've just lost a customer. You'll never get repeat custom, if we can call it that, from that individual again, because they have been rehabilitated. If you have somebody who goes to prison and comes out of it at the end just as angry and criminally minded as they went into it, it's probably only a matter of time before they go and commit another crime, and they'll be back and back and back, and you've got a pattern of recidivism. So that company will know they'll get that same customer, if that's the right word to use, 5 times over. They'll keep getting paid for that same person because they'll keep reoffending. Is there therefore any incentive on a private company to rehabilitate the prisoners, to make sure those prisoners never come back? Because if they do that really well, are they in effect doing themselves out of business? Could a government contract be framed in such a way that the company is rewarded more for the prisoners who rehabilitate than for the prisoners who don't? Possible. How do we handle this? How do we understand this to prevent corruption coming into the system? It also goes to questions of what is the prison for? Is it a place just of punishment, making people suffer? Is it just there to keep dodgy characters off the streets? Or is it there to rehabilitate and make those people model citizens? What's the function? What is the company being paid to do? And this begs these questions as to what should be private, what should be public, in terms of how it operates, how it behaves. Oh, not really talking this long in one go. Milton Friedman, back to him again, argues that the market balances itself out. In the long run, yes, you'll get individual business owners and individual people who maybe are corrupt or incompetent or whatever, but the market in the long run evens itself out and deals with those people. Because business effectively works by making a good, sizable profit. The incompetent will make less profit, the corrupt will make less profit because they're stealing money from the system and what have you. Therefore, the system itself, the market itself, will ultimately deal with these factors of human weakness in the long run. It doesn't really address, in terms of Friedman's philosophy, what happens to those harmed in the short term by all of these sorts of problems. This other clip you've got on this screen, again, that's about these issues of corrupt judges sending more black people than white people to prison and so on for bribes. But again, I won't play that here. I'll leave you to click that and watch it in your own time and reflect on the issues it flags up. Back to Jaworski and Brennan again. We've got this argument here which we've touched on already, in the sense that the counteraction to the Sandel's exploitation argument, people being exploited to sell their organs, they're so poor, sell sex to ugly customers, they're so poor. Jaworski and Brennan and a lot of other people have argued, to some extent, all of us who are being employed in some way are selling ourselves. We sell our time. If you've got a manual job, you might be selling your physical skills or your muscle power if it's a job with lots of fetching and carrying heavy weights. You might sell your knowledge. You might sell your expertise in some shape, form or time. We're all selling ourselves to some extent for a wage packet. So do I want to sit at home and watch reruns of Doctor Who, or do I want to spend that 2-hour period selling my 2 hours to give lectures or to stack shelves in Tesco's or to do whatever it is that I want to sell my 2 hours worth to do? In order to eat, I've got to sell my time, my skills, my knowledge. I can't spend it doing other stuff that I might prefer to do instead. This happens. So Jaworski's point is that how many jobs are there in the world that people would continue to do if they won £1 million on the lottery? You got some slightly unpleasant jobs listed there. People who work in the sewage system, cleaning all the filth and muck out the sewers. How many people would actually get a job working in the sewer? Doesn't bear thinking about, does it? If they were a millionaire on the lottery. Or would they say, you can take your broom and your Wellingtons and shove them, I'm off to spend my life on a beach in Hawaii, I'm not doing this job anymore. I would imagine probably 99% of people who work in the sewage system would stop working there if they won £1 million on the lottery. Likewise, those other jobs perhaps. But even if you've got a job, whatever job it is you're doing at the moment, which is not as smelly and unpleasant as working in a sewage tunnel, whatever your job is, if you won £1 million, would you keep doing that job? If the answer to that question is no, you'd be off doing exotic holidays or whatever, then from Jaworski and Brennan's point of view, you're selling yourself as a wheel. If you are one of those rare people who says, I so love my job, I would continue doing it even if I didn't need the money because I just really like doing this job and it occupies my time and what have you, then that's a different scenario. But if we think of every person in the world who is employed, what fraction would ditch the job? What fraction would continue to do the job when they no longer need the money? I'm not aware of any surveys on this, but I'd guess that fraction is a damn sight bigger than that fraction. Which brings us to the end. I can breathe a sigh of relief and give my vocal cords a rest. Next week, and I don't know at this stage if next week the college will be open or if it'll be a recording again. You'll be emailed to let you know. But next week, one way or the other, we'll look at the banking crisis, what happened, what caused it, the economic impact of it, and how the sort of ethical issues involved in the causation of the crisis, the government response to the crisis, and the impact it's had on people's lives, how in fact all pans out. Hopefully this has been useful. If you've got any questions, you can either email me or you can leave messages on the social media platforms I'm going to set up to enable you to do that. And we can talk that way, even if we can't have the sort of classroom banter that we normally have. Thank you.